a recording button to actually record. Okay, and we are live and recording. So, where are we on the roadmap? As you can see, we're working our way through it. OAuth Deep Dive starts next Wednesday, but before then, we got to do a little more with SSO Deep Dive today, an overview of OpenID Connect, and then communities on Monday, and then we spend lots of time on OAuth. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. We got Joseph, Pavithra, and Brenda presenting today, and Joseph, I'll kick it over to you.
Thank you. Okay. You guys can see my screen?
Not yet. You probably, you got to actually accept or tell it what you wanted to share.
Okay. Bad news, my Chrome going to get crashed.
No! It always happens at the worst of times.
Yes. Okay. In case it's getting crashed, let's move to the next session, then I'll take it in the end.
Okay. Brenda, how about we'll jump to you and then we'll circle back around to Joseph and Pavithra then.
Okay. Sounds good. So let me hit present, share my screen, share. Okay, so you should see my slides.
We do.
Okay, so this is an overview of OpenID Connect. And so I found a little graphic where it's a little guy at the grocery store who says wants to sign up for a Food Mart membership, and the customer says, no thanks, I'll just use my OpenID. So from a high level, OpenID Connect is an authentication layer which sits on top of OAuth 2.0. And just I put this little bullet point because this is a helpful reminder for me in terms of authorization versus authentication, right? So OpenID Connect allows you to use an existing account to sign into multiple websites without needing to register with new usernames, passwords for each application. So I think we're all familiar and with some of the social sign-on stuff that's already been presented, right? So sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Salesforce. All of these things are leveraging that OpenID Connect protocol. The nice things about it, your password is only given to the identity provider, and that provider then confirms your identity to the sites or the applications that you visit. And other than the identity provider, so Google, for example, Facebook, Salesforce, those sites or applications do not see your password. It's also an open protocol, right? So anybody can choose to use it or become an OpenID provider for free without having to register or be approved by any organization. As a protocol, it is governed by the OpenID Foundation. So there is a link here that you can go and access to learn more. And one thing that's interesting and was a little bit confusing to me when I was doing research to prepare is that OpenID, either a 1.0 or a 2.0, is different than OpenID Connect. And so those other versions are prior, they've been deprecated, and they've been replaced with the OpenID Connect as the standard protocol. So sometimes the terminology is used a little bit interchangeably, but it's important to specify when you're talking about it that it's OpenID, not just OpenID. Okay. So where is it used? Some of the benefits. Again, OpenID Connect is built on top of OAuth 2.0. So it gives applications a way of authenticating users without usernames or passwords. It is a token-based protocol. OpenID Connect can pass attributes about an individual beyond just, yes, they authenticated, right? So this enables the application provider to better understand the person behind who's been authenticated, if they allow it, some additional details about that individual that they can get from the OpenID provider. in order to improve the user experience for that user. One of the sites I visited called it SAML for a modern era. So it has a lot of the same capabilities of SAML in terms of providing that single sign-on experience, and it can move attributes about a user, around to the various applications that it's using, but in a more RESTful-oriented way. It allows for organizations to seamlessly manage all the constituents, and so constituents could be customers, partners, employees, and even getting into the Internet of Things, right, via that identity provider using OpenID Connect. One of the business use cases where it's used a lot is in reducing people abandoning their shopping cart, or wanting to encourage users to participate in a community, for example. I know that a lot of times I'll definitely abandon my shopping cart if it means I have to register with the site and create a username and password and going to go through the hassle. I'm much more likely to say, well, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to go buy it on Amazon, where it's an easier experience because I don't have to now, get another username and password I have to deal with. If there's any questions or comments, please feel free to stop me. As I was going through, I found a place that kind of listed out the differences, because I was definitely getting a little bit confused trying to really understand what is the difference between OpenID Connect and SAML. So there's a couple key differences. Some of it is more like terminology based. And so from a SAML perspective, the terminology that's used is the service provider. So maybe this is Salesforce, to the identity provider. And so maybe that's Active Directory, maybe that's Okta, whatever. And in OpenID Connect, the terminology that's used is the relying party. So that's like Salesforce, or the OpenID provider for sign-in. SAML is always a website. And so the OpenID Connect relying party could be a website, or could be a mobile application. I think this is a really important distinction in terms of identifying, well, when should you use SAML versus when should you use OpenID Connect? If there's any kind of a mobile app involved, then the best practice is going to be to use OpenID Connect in lieu of SAML, since SAML is inherently a browser-based process. So again, kind of from a terminology perspective, in SAML, there's an assertion, which is a signed XML document with the subject information, which is the user, right, who authenticated, their attributes, and then the issuer who issued that assertion, and other information about the authentication event. The equivalent in OpenID is the ID token, which is a signed JSON document that contains all the same information. And then again, another big difference here is that SAML uses, the browser, right? And whereas SAML can, I think, use kind of that back channel, which is kind of what it's referred to, versus the front channel of the browser, but it's typically not done. And so again, anything that's going to have like a mobile app, something that you don't want to rely so heavily on the browser, then OpenID Connect would be the better practice. From a Salesforce perspective, Salesforce can both be the client. So Salesforce in the OpenID Connect language can be the relying party. So and when we look at things like social sign-on, allowing users to log into Salesforce or log into their Salesforce community or anything like that with Google, Facebook, etc. That's leveraging OpenID Connect, where Salesforce is, again, the relying party. But Salesforce can also be an OpenID Connect provider via the Connected App Framework. So this allows organizations to run that and talk to Salesforce services. And it can be branded as like a login with Salesforce, or it's open to be branded with like a login with company name versus login with Salesforce. Leveraging Salesforce as an OpenID Connect provider Through the connected app framework, you've got a lot of control in terms of some of the same things we've talked about with authentication levels. When do you want to set your policies around how often a user has to log into the app? Any kind of, again, authorization policies, all that kind of stuff can be managed. And one thing that's really cool, I didn't get too much of a chance to play around with it. Salesforce provides an OpenID Connect playground to help kind of visualize how it all works together when you're connected to services. And so if you go and create a connected app, you can go to the playground, and it kind of walks you through kind of how you set that up and kind of what the requests and responses are in each of the steps to set Salesforce up as, again, the OpenID provider. So that's about all I got.
I am so glad you put that slide in about the differences between SAML and OpenID Connect, because I was having that same problem. It's like, okay, what's single sign-on versus social sign-on?
Right.
They seem so similar, but you set them up in two different places, and what's the difference? So thank you for putting that in there. That's very crucial to understanding.
Yep.
Any other questions from anybody? All right, thank you, Brenda. Joseph, are you back and ready to present?
Yes, let me give it a try again.
Okay. There we go.
Able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Quick introduction about me. I joined this group last week. My name is Joseph Thomas. You can call me Joe. I connect from India. Currently working in Honeywell as a CRM architect. Pretty new to Salesforce and pretty new to SSO. So I really need your help in case I'm getting stuck. So my topic is Salesforce SSO Troubleshooting. So I did a couple of Googling. I didn't find much of the things. So what I did was not only the troubleshooting, I put a couple of error messages. So what all the normal error messages we'll get and how we can resolve those error messages. So jumping to the first topic, which is SAML Assertion Validator, which we have discussed last week. So Salesforce has given a SAML Assertion Validator. So the navigation is we can go to single sign-on, search for single sign-on, click on the SAML Assertion Validator. And whatever the response we get, the SAML response, we can copy paste the response there, and we can click the validate button. It will show you something similar sort of this. And in case of any error, we can easily solve it. This is one of the way they say, and this normally the only way Salesforce is telling right now. Maybe I'm not aware of other ways. Any other ways we have other than this?
Well, Pavithra is going to do some show and tell, so maybe she'll have some other ideas for us.
Okay. So this is the first one, which wherever I'm Googling, I'm finding this is the first option they are saying. Second option is basically it's an error. Basically, they're saying in case we're getting insufficient privilege error. So the scenario is Salesforce is working as an identity provider right now. And sometimes the service provider, a user is getting insufficient privilege error. The troubleshooting mechanism, Salesforce is saying that log into the Salesforce, go to manage user, and there is an option called identity provide event log. And this log will tell you what is the reason for this error. So one of the reasons they say is the connected app which we created, we need to give the permission for the using the connected app. So even though you are a system administrator, you won't able to get able to log in until unless we give the permission for the profile. So this is another way which we are saying that under identity provider you can find it out. Any comments on this? Anyone have seen this error before?
Yeah, I've seen this error a number of times. That's the assignment can be done by profile or permission set. Frequently, it is done per permission set because you don't always want everybody in the profile, like 10,000 people, suddenly get access to something that some other external application that related to connected app. So a lot of times, permission sets are used for that type of permissioning.
Okay, thank you. And another error, again, it's insufficient privilege. So one of the blog, it says that when we enable the single sign-on, and when we try to use the login as feature as an admin, we used to get insufficient privilege error. And I didn't understand how to solve it. The solution they have given is change the role of your own account to test it. I seriously didn't understand how we can solve that. Anytime anyone has seen this, and when we enable this?
Yeah, that's a frequent error, because when we are system admins or like super user, usually these users created without a role. And as a reason for that, we don't want to have roles and ownerships and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of times, particularly around communities and some other external features accessing, there is a restriction on like the user that does the action must have a role. So sometimes there is a certain limitation in the system that don't allow you to get access to some features without having a role. So if that makes an explanation, I don't know. I've definitely seen this issue, and the way to do it is you just assign any role. It doesn't matter what role it is, but just assign a role. Or it could be sometimes maybe the role needs to be like a CEO or top level, so that you could see everything else down the line. Depends on how deep you go.
Okay, so this error will be normally comes when we enable this single sign-on, or it?
No, this comes when you actually try to access resource. Looks like if you try to log in with that single sign-on using your ID, and you don't have that, you may get this error if you're not set up, if you don't have a role, or maybe if you're trying to go something like SP initiated and you go in to see a record, right? You sign up and you see a record that lives in the org or lives somewhere, and that record requires you to be, let's say, at the top level of hierarchy or something like that.
Okay, thank you. So moving to the last one, this is a very common error which I've seen in the Google. When we search for it, it's whenever the identity provider certification is getting expired, and the solution is to get a new certificate. And it says that we can see this error in the response properly, and upload the solution is to upload the new certificate from the identity provider. I think this error will come when we refresh Sandbox or something. Any idea when all this certification can be expired?
Oh, I think it's the case you said, where I don't know about an expiring sandbox, but I mean, certificates have expiration dates on it, so it's just one of those things you get to keep an eye on as an admin, I guess. Is, hey, there's certificates coming close to expiration, go get a new one if the time's coming up.
Right. Yeah. Typically with your sandbox, it's just when if you don't have a separate single sign-on set up for your sandbox, then it doesn't matter if you refresh when it has it, you won't have single sign-on there. So it's just, the certificates don't last forever. So.
Okay. Yep, that's all I got. I only got this many troubleshooting mechanisms.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Pavithra, you are up.
Sure, Natalya. Good morning, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, sure can.
Okay, so Joseph talked about SAML Validator. Like, we have seen how to use SAML Validator earlier. So I'm going to show you some of other ways to validate the SAML assertions without using SAML Validator. One is the other tools which we can do is use the browser's network tab. So I'm going to show you how this works, and also there are other tools like SAML Tracer, which is an add-on on Firefox. So even this tool you can use to trace the SAML. And then there are in Chrome you have an extension called SAML Dev Tools extension, and we also have Fiddler. So we can use any of these kind of browser extension to read the SAML. Actually, like when you use browser network tab, you have SAML. So these tools kind of give you more of easier access to SAML assertion to see, instead of like going to browser network tab and then looking at the base encoded text and then converting it. So let me quickly show you like where you can see the SAML assertions in the browser tab. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I mean, show how we can see that. Let me go to the developer tool. Actually, I'm going to show you in Chrome first, and then I'll come back to. So I have this Axiom app, and I have already set up a single sign-on in my development org. So let me go ahead and add all the details here. I'm using a federated ID authentication, and then right. So when I go to, if you're already in any browser where you're trying to access the single sign-on, what you can do is you can go to the browser tab. You have, there is developer tools in the browser tab. There is something called as network. You select the network and click on this preserve log, so that when there are requests and responses happening, you can actually, it will preserve the log and it will not override. So you can use that. And then when you try to log in, let's trace the, have some error. So let's see what happened. So if I go to the select that issue, you can see the SAML response here. So one way, if in the Salesforce validator, like either you can copy this and paste it in your SAML assertion validator. Probably like you may not, since I just ran, it will always show the lost SAML validator, but there are situations wherein you're in production and one of your customer has issues, and you can ask them to just, when they try to log into SSO, just capture this log and give it to you, so that you can just run this capture this encoder and validate it. So that way you will know what is the issue. So in my case here, the when I ran this, and I pasted that SAML assertion here. So I got this issue saying that issuer did not match. So I can go back and correct it. So this was missing. So let me go back to my network, preserve log, and log in. So this time it worked, and you can also see, let's go and see the SAML log. So here, in the SAML response, like when I copy this and paste it in the validator, I think I did not copy. Oh, everything looks good. So this is one way of actually getting the SAML response and validating it. So the other ways, like I have this add-on SAML tracer. You saw another thing is like this is actually a base64 encoded. So if you want to see the actual SAML assertion, you can run this query. I mean, basically run this command in Windows or Mac to get the actual the SAML assertion. So you can just decode base64 and then see how the SAML assertion looks. That's done, and let me go ahead and show you how the SAML trace works. So I have the same axiom here. So I have set up everything here. I have the SAML tracer browser extension, so I can go ahead and log in. So I have already opened this one. So here, and you can also see all the posts, get all the request and responses happening between browser and your identity provider and SP here. So let me go ahead and log in. So here I can see that this is the SAML request. So I can see all the HTTP request here, and I can also go to my SAML. Now this is not in base64 because this tool makes sure that it decodes from base64 and gives the SAML assertion. So once we have this, we can use different browser extensions, as I told you, in different browsers. Once we have this SAML assertion available, we have to understand a bit about it, so that in case we do not have SAML validator, how we can actually understand how this SAML assertion works, and we can troubleshoot it. Let me go over one by one on the SAML assertion and talk about it. One thing, there are two browser interactions happen. One is when you are when the SSO is initiated by the service provider, there is something called a SAML auth request will be created, and this auth request will have the signature, its signature, and it will be called as HTTP redirect binding. I mean, if the signature is embedded, then we have this HTTP post binding. So if I go back to my SSO here, we provide the service provider initiated request binding. So based on the type of binding we have provided, so either it's going to be auth request with its signature where it uses HTTP redirect binding, or an auth request with signature embedded, HTTP post binding will be happen. So with here I have given an example where the signature is embedded. So as soon as the SP initiated auth request happens, SSO happens, you can see in your browser this SAML authentication request SAML will be generated, and here you can see the issuer and the digital signature. So this shows that actually SP in and also there will be a destination here. This destination will be your IDP login, where the URL of the IDP login. So based on this assertion, you can know that whether it is calling the right IDP URL, and also like see what is the SAML issuer going and if the digital signature is fine or not. So this is how you can interpret this SAML authentication request. Next, once the SAML authentication request is, once it is initiated, it goes to the IDP. IDP authenticates and then sends the SAML response back to the service provider. So this SAML response assertion will have various information. So let's go one by one and understand and see what is the importance of those SAML tags. So the SAML response would look something like this. When initially the SAML response will be sent, we also saw here, right? So the SAML response starts with SAML2P response, and you can see that it will have the destination now is the login. In the login URL of your endpoints for your service provider, and it will have the version of the SAML. So if you're using 1.1 or 2.0, so you can see that here. Next, let me go. If we go next, we can see that this has a SAML to issuer information. So the SAML, here, two things you have to note while troubleshooting. One is the SAML issuer should match what you have given in your single sign-on. So if the issuer here is HTTP Axiom SSO, the same issuer name should be available here. So if this does not match, then Salesforce is going to throw an error. And the other thing is Salesforce is going to expect the issuer, the format, SAML2 format as URN OSS names TCs, this format. If the format is wrong, then Salesforce is going to throw an error. So the SAML assertion will be invalidated. So this is related to SAML issuer. Next, we'll go to the next tag. The digital signature. So with a digital signature, basically it will have various information. So there are tools like XML digital signature verifier. So you can use these kind of tools to verify if the signature is fine. So you can take this part and try to validate that. I haven't tried it yet because I didn't have a valid kind of signatures to try. So I'm going to do that. If you guys try, let me know in the Slack channel. So to valid, what I know is like you can use this digital signature to verify that. And Salesforce, if this is not a valid signature, then Salesforce is going to throw an error. There are scenarios where I read in Google where if you're using an Active Directory like Azure, sometimes you may not be exporting the digital signature in the right format, not in the X509 certificate. In that scenario, when you go and upload this identity provider certificate, then you might have issues. So you need to make sure that you are exporting those certificates in the right format and then uploading it to the single sign-on. Okay, next, let me go to the next assertion node. So here we have this SAML2 subject. So whenever we have to make sure that the subject in the SAML2 assertion is correct and matches either the Salesforce username or the federation ID. Here I am using the federation ID, so I have given here I have given the federation ID, where you can see the name ID is with the value the federation ID. So if you have if your SAML identity type is federation ID, you have the SAML assertion should have the federation ID here in the subject name ID. And if you have username, if the SAML identity type is user Salesforce username, then this should actually be the Salesforce username. And if you're using any other attribute in the user object, so this subject would be based on those information. And so from a subject perspective, we have to see two things. One is your username or the federation ID matches. And the second thing is you have to make sure that the recipient URL is always matching correctly. So if the recipient URL is not matching, then we are going to the Salesforce is going to throw a invalidation error. So we have to make sure that the recipient ID matches correctly. That's from the subject node perspective. Next is from the conditions. So Salesforce looks for this condition statements to see it has a valid timestamp. If there is no valid timestamp, then the Salesforce is going to throw an error. So we have these conditions. Will have this node SAML2 conditions, and it should have a valid timestamp here. If the timestamp is wrong or it's not valid, then it is Salesforce would throw invalid SAML assertion error. And another thing with this condition is the audience restriction. So here we have to make sure that the audience in this SAML2 assertion matches the audience what we we have to make sure it matches the entity ID in the single sign-on setting. So if it this happens mostly when we have my domain, and sometimes when we are configuring any of these identity providers, they might take a my domain, and now you might have different community URLs, or you might have different Lightning will have different URLs. So in those scenarios, like you might get a lot of these audience error. Either you go with the default entity ID, or like you give your domain ID and make sure the ID in the identity provider you are setting up this wherever you have to set up, it is set up correctly so that you can verify your SAML assertion as the right audience. So that's how you would troubleshoot the conditions and the audience here. And the next node is related to auth statement. So if there is no auth statement in your assertion, Salesforce is going to throw an invalid error. So we have to make sure that there is an auth statement available in the SAML assertion. The next node is related to attribute statement. So in the attribute statement, basically you will have the attribute names. So different like SSO start page, logout URL. If these are not matching correctly with whatever the attributes we have given here, then the Salesforce is going to throw an error. So we have to make sure that the attributes names are correct, and it is matching whatever we have provided in the Salesforce. So that's the mostly high level how we can go about looking at the SAML assertion and seeing our seeing our SSO configuration to see what might be going wrong. And next, another thing is about relay state. So when I was trying to use this SSO for communities, I was having a trouble because I set up the SAML single sign-on, but once I set up SAML single sign-on, when it is SP initiated, then I wanted from community, it was not going to the community URL, rather it was going to the Salesforce main Salesforce URL. So for that, what I had to do was I have to set up two different SSOs, one for the main Salesforce, another for the community. In the community, I used what I did is in the community setup, I used this relay state to actually redirect the SAML after the authentication to go back to the community URL instead of like going back to the Salesforce URL. So let me show you an example where how this would work. So let me actually log out from here and log in. So if say for example I had a community. So I have this community. For this, I need to set up the single sign-on. So I'm going to use all this same single sign-on setup. I'm just going to use this relay state instead of the other relay state. So I'll go ahead and request SAML, and then I'll say login. Now you see that I could see my community now, so it took me to my community. So using relay state, we can actually redirect back to the so basically what happens in relay state is like SP is sending you some context here, and through relay state based on this context it will retain even after the authentication. So use this relay state for basically in SP initiated where you want to have some context available after the authentication. So that's what the relay state will be used for. Any questions?
So it sounds like a lot of this comes down to making sure that what is getting sent matches what you're expecting to get sent. And if there's a mismatch anywhere along the line, we're going to have problems.
That's correct, yeah.
So maybe that's an exam tip where if any question talks about something was sent but you expected something else, then maybe that's the right answer.
Right, yeah.
Is there something you were showing there on some of the tools available when you're receiving those assertions that's generated by, I guess, identity provider? They're usually encoded. And so any of these tools, I know one of them had it decoded, so you could actually see all the different details. I'm just wondering, is that the only tool that was available to show you the unencoded version of this?
No, actually all these SAML tracer, SAML DevTool extension, and Fiddler all provides unencoded version. In case you do not have these things, for example, like most of the times what happens is you're sitting with your customer to have this decoded and they may not have these browser extensions. So in that scenario, you can just go to the browser network tab and ask them to provide the Base64 encoded, and then you can use the simple command to encode it through Base64.
There's also several web both Base64 encoders and decoders, and there's also
Right.
XML prettifiers. So you can take that statement, do a decode, and then run it through another thing that makes it pretty, so it's all nice and organized. And then you can actually edit it and then re-encode it and put it back in the validator to make sure that what you think it needs actually works.
Ooh.
And that actually comes in a lot more when you're doing when you're using user provisioning, where you can't seem to get it through when you're working back and forth with your IDP trying to get the right thing sent. Sometimes it's just easier to go into the assertion and make some changes. Make sure you're changing your time period, because that time gives you just a couple of minutes. So you have to go in and make sure that the time is set, or you'll keep getting, that the thing is stale and you can't use it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I noticed on that slide you had with the timestamp, it looked like it was giving you like a minute to
Yeah.
complete it.
And there's actually more than one place in there you have to modify. If you get into changing this, you'll go look at that one first, and it'll still tell you that it's not right. And then you'll look in there. There's a couple of other places that throughout the whole process are used for timing. So it's not just the one spot.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is I've had a number of times hit a wall where a service provider that we're configuring with Salesforce does not provide all of the details and all the information to set up SSO. And one of the critical pieces it usually misses is that format. And since there are about 10 different formats available for these encoding the values, like the OS, SAML, something, or ID, those identifiers are important to get it matched. And so sometimes it was just a trial and error because the other service provider does not give me that information. I have no idea. There's no documentation or anything like that. So it's almost like trying one, didn't fail, trying another one, and until you actually hit one that works.
Another thing too you want to kind of look at with the relay state is understand what your IDP does with that, because there are some IDPs that allow you to just put, let's say, the record specific stuff. So if you're coming back into Salesforce, all you do is put the record ID as the relay state, and it takes that and adds it back to the URL that you have for the redirect, and it actually guides you then to that particular record. Some of them want you to put in the entire URL. So you got to kind of know how the IDP is going to respond with that relay state when you use it.
Okay, any other questions or comments on what we covered today? Troubleshooting or OpenID Connect? Awesome. All right, let's go back to the presentation briefly. I'll wait for, okay. And so just a reminder, by now you all probably know where all these schedules and resource links are. For next session, it's fun with communities, and play around with SSO both on communities and in the regular Salesforce org, and really go deep into that. Make sure you understand how to set up the different login options, because that is like, what, 7% or 15% of the exam? I can't quite remember offhand. And Monday we have one more session that isn't OAuth, and then we deep dive into OAuth for a while. So we've got Jeff, Satish, and Jasim on for Monday, and you see your topics there. I'll also tag people in the Slack channel to remind you that you have a presentation coming up. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, I was on mute. I had a question for Pavithra and maybe others. So for certificates, is it typically only one certificate that is involved, or are there times when there are more than one certificate, one from the IDP and one from the service provider?
You do need two. So the one that's provided there, let's say at the top section, that's the one that the service provider gives you for you to be able to call over to the service provider to get, the identity provider provides you for you to call over to actually ask for identity. You have to prove who you are. The second one comes in if you want to do the server initiated, because when you go over to the IDP and get the identity, then the IDP routes back to the server, the service, in order with the identity. There's also, you can give the IDP a certificate that says, when you come back to me with an identity, I want you to validate that you should be coming to me. So if all you're doing is identity initiated, you just need the one certificate at the top. The second one comes in if you're doing the server initiated.
Yeah, and I saw that that was actually optional, but
Yes.
if you set it up on the IDP in the connected app to say that, hey, the server is going to send me a certificate, and then the service provider doesn't send the certificate, the request will fail, even if the username and password is correct.
Yeah, I actually have a clarification question there. This frequently, this comes up in various implementations where it's a CA signed certificate versus self-signed certificates. And typically in the Salesforce, a lot of times we deal with self-signed certificates, when we're testing and building. But what is the best practices or what is enforcing to more like who is enforcing to be a CA certificate versus self-sign, and or do you choose as an admin, as an architect, like, hey, let's use self-signing certificate and let's exchange that?
No, there's a clear reason for this. Back when we studied over the summer for the integration, somewhere within there was a good reference of when you can use a self-signed and when you have to use a CA signed. So there's documents here. Maybe we can go dig those back out over the summer, because it's very clear in certain places you cannot use a self-signed.
Yeah, one place you have to, or one place the non-Salesforce side has to have CA signed is when you're making a call out to it. Salesforce will not allow an API call out to a site that has a self-signed certificate. It's got to be CA signed.
We've actually kind of got a different thing. It's not an issue we're dealing with, but in one of our single sign-ons where we've defined the certificate back to the ID. So when you set this up, Salesforce is going to require you to put something in that location in order to do server initiated calls. You have to have some kind of cert there. That one allows you to do a self-signed, but it requires you to have something. Now, if your IDP doesn't require you to pass something, then it doesn't hurt that you're sending it over. They just choose not to use it. But we were using a self-sign. It is now expiring on a production org, and everyone's up in arms about what do we do here. It's like, well, it's not needed. We just have to get a new cert in there. But it will require you to put it even if you're not using it.
Yeah, but yeah, the only place I've seen so far where the CA signed, it must be CA signed, is when you're trying to make a call out from Salesforce, and it doesn't like the self-signed ones in that case.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of the rule of thumb to use is: are you using the certificate to just validate back and forth you're talking, or are you using the certificate to say you're somebody? So in the case where you're calling out, you're proving to who you're calling that you are in fact Salesforce. Well, you can't do that on your own. If you're going to prove who you are, somebody else has to say this is who that person is. So your client cert that you're calling out, you have to have somebody else say, yes, I validated that this is Salesforce. If you're just doing something where you've given me a certificate, you are signing something with the public key, I'm using the private key, I'm using the public key to validate that. The fact that you have the certificate and can decode it, whether it's a self-signed or CA, doesn't matter because you're actually using the key. So I think it comes down to what you're using it for.
Yeah, that could be. So if anybody finds some good links on that, definitely put those in the resource list, because that is on the exam about how do servers establish trust between each other. When we get into OAuth, you'll see a couple of the flows require certificates, but they don't say that they have to be CA signed. In fact, the instructions show you how to self-generate a certificate. So know when to use them, what kind to use them, and if you have some good links. Yeah, Jeff, that's a good point. We'll have to go back to the integration notes and see if we can find the
yeah, I know we have some there. So
and a dumb question here. So when we say certificate, are we referring to the public key? What are we referring to?
So in effect, every cert has both a private key and a public key. So whoever creates that certificate, they create it with a private key, and you never give that to anybody. That's your piece of it that you say, I'm going to sign it when I'm sending something else. And then what you distribute out is anybody who wants to use that, you would then give them the public key. So that you take something, sign it with the private, pass it over, they have the public, they can undo it. So when you go into Salesforce and you create the CA piece within the key management, you're in effect creating a private key within the system. You send that out to a CA to get signed. They will send back to you the public key that goes with that. So now everything you do, you sign it on your side with the private. The person who's receiving it, they then use the public to either verify the signature or unencrypt it if you're actually encrypting.
So when you're actually downloading the metadata, the only thing that's included there is a public key.
Correct. You never give your private key away, because if somebody gets a hold of that, they now can access into your stuff. So that's something you've got to keep very tight. Public key you can give to anybody, because you're allowing them to use whatever you encrypt or whatever you sign. I guess it goes both ways.
Okay, thanks.
I actually have another question. I don't know if anybody ever hit this before. So with Salesforce, I had to set up multiple SSO channel, basically SSO configurations, where Salesforce acts as an IDP and their service provider, and then service provider has multiple entities within it. And so essentially, to sign into each one of the entities, you need to have a different SSO channel. But what the service provider did, it was they only had one single entity ID for all of them. And then Salesforce would not allow me to set up these multiple SSOs. This is a community use case where you have multiple communities trying to get in through community, users get into these other service providers. But since the entity ID was always the same, Salesforce requires the entity ID to be unique, it looks like. It wouldn't allow me to even save that configuration. It'll tell me like, hey, you already have entity ID set up for the previous SSO, just use that. Anybody seen that uniqueness requirement? And is it particular to Salesforce, or is this something SAML standard?
I actually saw this in one of the official documents on the trail mix, that very thing, and it said that exact case where if the service provider has multiple areas, then you do indeed only set up the one connected app for it, and then you use relay state to say which part of the service provider are you sending them back to.
Okay.
I'll have to find that link, because yeah, I actually made a note of that because it was very clear that, you know, it's like if like the service provider has 3 different things, you're not going to set up 3 separate connected apps. You're going to set up one,
yeah,
and then you'll send it back with relay state.
In my case, this was kind of a very maybe unique case, because this service provider is a cloud-based and it's a learning system, like LMS system.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine that LMS system supports multiple universities. So obviously it's the same system, but multiple universities is in it. And so you don't really have one university to go to.
But is it splitting the universities like after the slash? Like it's a different university name, or is it a different subdomain?
Well, it's a different subdomain. It's completely different subdomain. It's a different entity. Everything is different except the entity ID. For some reason, they've ended up with the same entity ID.
See, that makes no sense. If you're going to different subdomains, you would think that each of those subdomains would be its own entity ID, and then you don't have a problem anymore.
Yes, that's what I would think. But and I kind of assumed that. I thought, well, maybe that I could use their domains for that. And that didn't work either. I mean, it didn't work on their end. It worked on Salesforce, but their end without unless I have that exact entity ID, which is the same. And I looked for all these instances, and all the instances had exactly the same entity ID.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe go back to relay state and see what they can support for passing relay state back to then redirect to the subdomain.
Yeah.
Fun problem. If you ever figure it out, let us know how you did it.
Yeah.
Jeff, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just, okay. I guess I didn't go back off after the last comment.
Okay. All right. Any final thoughts? We have 2 minutes left. Otherwise, we'll end this session. Okay, everybody. Have fun playing with communities. Go deep into SSO. One thing I realized is as you're doing all this SSO and as you start playing with OAuth, pay very careful attention to all the stuff on the connected app screen. I had one of those epiphanies this morning when I was studying, like, oh my God, there's a lot there on the connected app, depending on what you're using it for. So learn the different parts of it, and you're probably going to touch a lot of them as you start playing more with OAuth and Canvas and everything else. But it's on the exam about what role connected apps play in everything. So that's my word of advice to you for today. And with that, we're going to stop presenting, stop the recording, and meeting is done. As always, I'll hang out till